Hi, I'm Jordan, and this is my book review. For my book, I chose Coming of Age in New Jersey, College and American Culture, and the book is by Michael Moffat. So, to start off with, I'm going to talk about the author, Michael Moffat himself. He was an anthropologist who focused on ethnographies, in particular of education, and he was mainly active at Rutgers University in the USA. He was also at, I believe, Reed University, and he joined the faculty in 1973. So the ethnography is actually quite old by comparison to a lot of the other ones, which were in like the 2000s. This one takes place in the 70s and 80s. And his style was described as very non-conforming because of his research methods. Like a lot of the time, he would be very hands-on by comparison to people who perhaps would take more surveys, be more hands-off. He enjoyed involving himself and took a lot of reference from coming of age in Samoa, which is why the name is so similar. The actual research methods that he adopted was to integrate himself into the university life. So what he did was he enrolled himself as a student while actually a professor as a freshman from out of state, choosing to focus on participant observation and participating himself in college activities. Because he acted like he was an older out of state freshman, people weren't too suspecting about this 30-year-old guy who was in freshman halls. And because he was very much integrated, it allowed him to explore the college campus in a more unique way. The importance of the hands on method is to actually experience it properly, like I just explained. He allowed himself to get fully immersed into college life, and the results created a bigger image and in greater detail of what college life actually was from a student's point of view instead of a researcher point of view, which creates a more full image. Whereas if you look at things a lot of the time for ethnographies, it's from a researching point of view. Whereas here he goes to the students and lives amongst them directly, meaning that he gets his own ideas, but also because of the way which he's living, it's a much bigger picture results. So a big part of the study was actually becoming an adult and adulting and forming identity on university campuses. The focus of the research in particular is the transition that happens during college, that I'm sure everyone is aware of, going from a freshman or a first year all the way up until you graduate as a third or fourth year. You develop quite a lot, not so much in terms of education style, but so much as a person and social development. A big part of his study is actually the role of sex on campus, which is it's quite in depth. That how he discusses how people form their identities through social interaction. It's a really big part of coming of age, especially in freshman year. People are exploring themselves a lot more. And also because of it's actually on campus, and he chose, I believe this is the correct campus now. He lived in the student halls, so he saw the social dynamics and social development firsthand, and overall as well how American cultural values were exchanged and then further explored, and use them to compare for students as they would be in textbooks or in terms of greater American life. So, in terms of the American values, it reinforces the ideas of equality, in particular for equality through sex, such as men and women being treated equally in society, in particular in societies in university, and in between halls and classes, everyone's treated on a more similar level. There's not so much of this I can't remember it, between sex at university level because everyone is in a very similar point where they're developing themselves. Where they're developing themselves. So there's not really much of a comparison between men and women so much. Ideas of individualism, which are a big part of American values as well. Becoming yourself in society, for example, making your own way in the world is a big part of American values and the American dream, one of the foundations of capitalism. Same with personal achievement. In terms of education wise, a lot of it focuses on social, but in terms of the personal achievement, it's more of an education focused part of student life, in particular as well for first years who are new to university. You can see that there's a lot more pride around their results, and also freedom and liberation, in particular for people who haven't really discovered themselves or haven't explored themselves outside their own communities. This freedom and liberation for themselves allows them to form new ideas and also to rebel against things which perhaps if you came from quite a small town out of the way, perhaps you have very old-fashioned as it would be ideas, and breaking free of those and liberating yourself. Another thing which he explored was subcultures within the university. So, for example, fraternities, groups of international students, liberal communities, and other societies. In terms of fraternities, international students, and liberal communities, or artistic communities, it's more of discussing how people find their ways into them and organize themselves in social structure. So people who perhaps go to fraternities get in with that crowd, participate in society different to how international students interact with other international students, or how artistic communities interact within themselves. He discussed a lot of different groups, but these were some of the main ones which you can highlight. In the 7 short essays that make up the book, he discusses quite a lot like how different subcultures interact as well with each other, and you can see that in I think when we look at ourselves at how things are done. And a big part of it is the challenges, and a big challenge for him was actually the fact that he is a 30-year-old college professor and already has his pre-made ideas of what university or college culture is, and it's kind of hard to clue in with generational issues. So, being this is the 70s, 80s, there's obviously unique issues going on there. But if you pull that back to when he was in his 20s and would have been in college in the 60s, there's other issues. For example, Vietnam was obviously a big issue then. Compared to the 70s, 80s, there's other issues going on, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But there's always bias into how he views the lives of college students, especially freshmen, because he's a professor. He's been at Rutgers University. By the end of them, he'd been doing this study over numerous years, so he'd seen a lot of changes. And also the fact that because he is an adult, he's been adulting for much of his life, and he'd already been technically adulting throughout the entire time he was doing this study. So he doesn't have that experience of then discovering what adulting is, to look after yourselves the same way the students are, which he's observing. So despite the fact he is participating in the process of seeing them adult and seeing them from the structural side, the social side of it, he's not able to see a lot more of the personal development which comes along with that. Obviously, he's exposed to some new ideas because as he is there for that extended period of time, he is obviously getting new ideas. But also, the fact is that if you have been adulting for 10 plus years of doing this study, then you're not going to have the same results that can be shown when someone who's just come into university, straight from a town, is going to have a different time with those issues. So overall, just some sort of conclusions. Firstly, was the college is obviously a huge part of personal development. I think everyone can agree that social development in particular is a big part of coming to college and university. You find out what sort of groups you belong to. And Moffat also had his own personal development, discovering things while on the college campus which he didn't perhaps know about himself beforehand. Again, he is 33, but I think we don't really stop adulting until you completely take yourself out of that environment. So he is learning from the students as this goes along and discovering more about himself, just to a lesser degree, which is why the results aren't entirely complete in that way. As well, how subcultures impact social development and personal development, finding out where you find yourself in society, as well as the cultural development interpretation of what makes American culture and American college life was a big part of what you can see from the conclusions, and how, if you try and look for them, they're quite obviously there. As well as exposure to greater diversity. College and university is a place where a lot of people from all over the world come together. You think about even all the nationalities and all the backgrounds of just the classroom which we're in, where there's 25 people. There's so many different backgrounds. People from the US, or lived in the US, from Japan, from China, from the UK, from all over. There's so many different worldviews, and that a college is expressed at quite a concentrated place, which allows them to expand their worldview themselves. And similar sort of things here. The implications of this finding, a big part is actually the research method itself, and how we look at participant observation. A lot of time you can take it quite literally, participant observation, you watch the participants, but involving yourself in the participant observation as well was quite groundbreaking, quite different when Moffat was conducting it. And that's a really big part of actually the study itself. And also about the ideas of how scholars look at the personal side of college and the college experience from the side of the students. I feel like when you actually educate yourself on how college students act as a teacher, you get a greater understanding of what's going on in their heads, for example. And also Moffat in the essays, he's exploring these ideas from someone who has done this, has been at college and understands the bureaucratic side of it. He's been a university professor, he's been at these sort of meetings and has been in that side of the university for long enough that he brings that perspective as well as the new perspective of the students. Also exploring diversity on campus and how that plays a big role in someone's adulting. I feel that campuses end up being a lot more of a liberal place because of this. And I think we can see that especially in something like the ILA, which is extremely international. And also engaging in is kind of like a side point which I've added in there. It's like the extracurricular side of it, or like it's more so to do with the subcultures and how that helps us find ourselves, especially within college, is a part of it. And thank you for listening.